Alright guys, so in this video I'm going to be discussing the hypothetical, what if the South Tower was hit first? Somebody asked me this on my Discord and I don't think I've done a video on it, so I'm going to be talking about, would there potentially be a different situation, more casualties, things like that, if the South Tower had been hit first. Now, there's a few key things to note. There is no real structural difference between the North Tower and the South Tower. You might think, well, the North is stronger than the South because the North was hit first and stayed up longer. No, it's just based off of where the planes impacted the building. The South Tower got hit at an angle, an off angle, and it got hit lower, so there was more weight on top of where it was hit. And I guess in terms of this hypothetical, I'm just going to say, let's pretend the South Tower got hit dead center, and then the North Tower gets hit 25, maybe 30 minutes later, gets hit at an off angle. The North Tower would fall first, even though it got hit later because of where it was hit, and then the South Tower would fall after that. But when it comes to the buildings, this is very key to understand. If the South Tower gets hit the same way the North Tower got hit, all of the three elevators in the building core would be totally destroyed. So anyone above the impact zone, people say, well, it's impossible to survive if you're above the impact zone in the North Tower because all of the elevators were severed because, and this is kind of getting confusing because we're confusing the towers, but in real life, the way the plane hit the South Tower, because it was at such an off angle to the side, one of the shafts, the staircases, was accessible, and that's how some people were able to make it down. Not a lot of people, but people were able to escape that way. Now, the big concern with this hypothetical is because the South Tower was so heavily populated, above the 77th floor, around 3,500 people were very high up on the South Tower when the North Tower was hit, and a lot of those people evacuated. Now, it has been reported, and this is a widespread thing, the protocol was, well, the North Tower was just hit, an explosion happened, they really didn't know. They told the people in the South Tower, no, don't come down, stay where you are, we don't know what's going on. Because obviously, at that point, if you're in control of the South Tower, you probably don't even know for minutes that a plane hit the North Tower. You just know that there was some type of an explosion, but human nature would tell you, get out of the building. If you're in two identical towers and one of them, something happens to it, you're going to leave. So that's why a lot of people were able to escape the South Tower. But had the South Tower been hit first, it would have been the deadliest event in relation to 9/11. It would have been, in the South Tower alone, likely over 3,500 people because of where they were located and because they would have been hit first and directly centered to where there's no escaping outside of, you could potentially use a parachute, but obviously they didn't have that, or possibly do the other strategy, which I talked about, where you push yourself up against, and this is all hypothetical, it's, obviously it's not going to happen, it's just, we're wondering, is there an actual way to escape if you're above the impact zone and there's no way down, there's no access point? Could you potentially push yourself up against the wall, grab something, you would need some type of hammer, or I don't know, some office supplies, and kind of shimmy yourself down the wall, use the hammer to break into a window below the impact zone, and then escape that way. And obviously that's just basically impossible. You're dealing with crazy smoke, and you would also have to be located on the correct side of the building where there was no impact, because obviously if you're trying to shimmy down the outer wall of one of the towers, there's going to be a hole in the side of the wall, so you would have to go on one of the walls where there was no hole. That's another thing, and this is all happening within 30 to 45 minutes, and you're dealing with an insane amount of smoke. So it's completely unrealistic. So obviously, it was extremely tough to do much of anything if you were above, outside of if you were in the South Tower, because of the way the plane hit, in real life I'm saying, because of the way the plane hit, you would have been able to possibly get down one stairwell because the wings did not reach far enough to sever it. But in general, it's not like these two towers are different in terms of the way they were built. Yes, technically the North Tower was seen as kind of like the main tower. It was One World Trade Center. But if it was hit the same way the South Tower was hit, it would have acted very similarly. So it would have fell relatively quickly, and it would have buckled and inverted under its weight, just like how the South Tower fell, where the top of it fell at an angle because of the way it was hit on its side, lopsided. The north was a lot more even because it was hit directly in the center. So if the South Tower, under this hypothetical, was struck first the same way the North Tower had been struck in real life, it would have been even worse because of the amount of people that were in the South Tower above the impact zone of where it would have struck. Now, theoretically, what would happen in a situation like this is you would get more survivors from the North Tower. They would be able to escape after seeing the South Tower get hit, but because of the amount of people that would have been in the South Tower, it would have been even worse. Now, getting to some other photos I wanted to talk about, just that I've seen recently. The first thing I wanted to, well, that's a very interesting photo you can see seemingly at night. I wonder if that was during its construction, because it looks like only the lobbies were lit up. And during the final months of the tower's construction, they only had the lobbies lit. It was mainly lights from construction that lit them up, and you can see directly across there's a bunch of undeveloped land right next to the tower, so that had to have been likely in the 1970s. And then taking a look at the weather on September 10th. Did it rain? How bad was it? Well, yes, it rained. You can see the precipitation towards the end of the day. It looks like it kind of thunderstormed at around, I want to say 7:30, 7:40, and then you can see the rain did stop around 10 o'clock at night. That's September 10th. The weather data of New York City that I found as well. This is a photo from March of 2001. It's always interesting to look at photos just months before in the lobby with all of the different country flags there. And then you can see a few photos of the carport, which had to have been the North Tower. The carport kind of resembles maybe like a hotel. And obviously, there were some very bad things with the carport when it comes to the roof. And then looking at, this is under the Twin Towers. A lot of people wonder, did the mall actually survive? And really, what would happen to the mall if it was still around today? Now, technically, people assume that the entire structure would just collapse inward and the mall would be gone. But the mall was angled off. It wasn't directly beneath the towers. It was more under the complex, like buildings 4, 5, and 6. So while there were parts of the mall that caved in, it was kind of like the subway system. There were, like, a lot of the mall was, not that it was salvageable, but it was not completely destroyed. Theoretically, you could have been inside of stores in the underground mall during September 11th and survived. There would be a lot of smoke and things like that, but you technically, actually, I don't know if you would have survived with the amount of smoke. It would have been very hard, but would a mall like this exist today? What would they do to it? Guys, this would have been renovated 100%. There's no way that this type of mall that has no natural light underground would be around in today's world. They would have renovated it. I also think they would have renovated buildings 4, 5, and 6 and changed out the exterior into a full glass design, which is the more modern approach. When it comes to the towers, there's really not a lot you can do with the exterior design, but with the smaller buildings, you can certainly renovate those. What would they have turned them all into? I honestly have no clue. Maybe some extra parking, maybe storage, but I highly doubt it would still be a shopping center. I guess you could argue because it's New York, it's hard to find area to build shopping centers. They could potentially keep it, but it does seem rather unlikely. Either way, that is just my opinion on if the South Tower hypothetically was hit before the North Tower and what would have happened after that. How would things have been different? Obviously, it wouldn't have changed anything in terms of both the towers falling, but I do think it would be a worse situation. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.